right, let's start. First, welcome and thank you for having me. I'd like people to go to menti.com, enter the following code for a couple of questions I will be asking during my talk. The code will also be shown at the bottom of a couple of slides that are coming up, so you have your time to enter them, to enter it. Having said that, let's move to the next slides, which I'm going to skip because these are about me. They will be in the PDF at the end. It's not interesting. Just one important point: the views I'm presenting today are my own. They're not APG's, by the way, which is a responsible investor in pensions. So it was very funny that that was at the end of the previous talk. What are you going to get? You're going to get an extremely condensed journey from the essentials to the ethics of the digital revolution. So we have to start with the start, and the start at the root of everything. And then the question is that I want you to answer on Menti is: how recent do you think digital processing is? So please go to Menti and answer the question. And the question is: how long have you really been using it? So not a curiosity, not a strange machine, not research, but really use in our society's communities. And while you're answering that, I'm going to say a couple of things about digital. Because if you want to answer that question, you have to ask yourself, when is something actually digital? And the founder of, say, information theory, Alan Turing, had something to say about it, which is a very large quote, but in essence, he said, digital machines are machines which have kind of sudden jumps or clicks, right? Definite states. And he also said there are no such machines. And he was absolutely right? Because all the machines we're using, which are digital, in the end, deep down below, they're just analog machines. They have analog components only. And there are intermediate states, but we have organized these machines in such a way that we forget about the intermediate states. And what these machines actually do is logic, classical logic with ands and ors and whatnot. So again, what's then the essence of digital? Now, well, the essence of discrete logic is that it's independent from space and time, right? It's dimensionless. 2 + 2 = 4 doesn't change over time. It's not true today and not true tomorrow, and it's not true here and not true there. The difference with it is raining is clear, right? That can change over time, or that's different in different places. So what logic is, what these machines are doing, is absolutely independent from human experience or interpretation. That's what the machines do. It's not what we do. So the perspective that I'm going to offer I'm going to put in a couple of perspectives during my talk. That is a discrete logical behavior. What these machines do is fundamentally different from the real rest of our behavior, because it is dimensionless. And that comes with strengths and weaknesses. And the strength of logic is that it's absolutely reliable, right? There is no uncertainty, there is no doubt. The same input means the same output. It cannot be otherwise. There is no possibility to doubt or change. And logic also can scale up massively without losing coherence, because all those parts are reliable, right? I cannot make infinite machines, but I can, in theory, make infinite logic. That leads to this transportability, right? Compare with a telephone game, which you all have played when you were young. If you have a kind of a difficult message, it comes out garbled at the other end. But there's a weakness also, because logic in itself is extremely rigid, it's dumb, it's absolute, it's inflexible. And that leads to brittleness. Logic is very sensitive to correct inputs to produce the correct outputs. So for instance, even a little bit broken means completely broken. A very small security breach in a large environment means the criminal is in, and in is in. Doesn't matter if it's a large or a small breach. Now, the complexity of dependencies between all these logical elements is more than people can handle. And actually, it's people that create the logic, and we do that poorly. We make errors, and we cannot foresee every combination. And the underlying physical world is a blind spot for many as well. For instance, I recently heard about somebody put in just faster hardware, and the software on top of it, it failed because the hardware was too fast. Nobody thinks about, taking into account that the hardware would be so fast that another system would not be able to react in time. Now, humans we are unique in nature because we have a discrete number sense and we are capable of logic, right? And it's part of what Daniel Kahneman says, it's our system too. There are animals who can count, like magpies can count, but as soon as you get to 6 or 7, and Dehaene gives that example, the magpie has an error rate of about 50%. For us, the difference between 6 and 7 or 106 and 107, that's not a real difference because we actually have that discrete number sense. And that brings us to the information revolution. Now, going back to the industrial revolution, if you look at it, you can say it's physical machines, which we have added, and they have grown the amount of physical behavior performed under human intent. And if you, with that same kind of a definition, look at the information revolution, you get logic machines growing the amount of logical behavior performed under human intent. Now, before the Industrial Revolution, there was already a lot of physical behavior in the world, right? But not so much of it was under human intent. More of it got under human intent, but not so much at that time. Before the information revolution, there was only a very, very tiny amount of very slow logical behavior in the world, namely human logical behavior, what humans could do. And even that tiny bit of slow logic made a big difference. So let's have a look at the Menti.com result. And you see people choosing, say, less than 100 years, and there are a couple of people, not many people voted, by the way. So people can, let's stop with the voting. Roughly, say, a quarter of says it's older than 5,000 years. Indeed, if I give my answer, we get that. If you look at digital processing and data, any writing of numbers, even just dots or strokes, is digital, right? It's digital processing and digital data. Writing a language using an alphabet, right? It's digital. There is no halfway A or B character. There is absolutely clear it's an A or it's a B. So an alphabet is digital. That, by the way, makes it so easy to use for communication. So accounting and writing are probably the oldest forms of digital processing and data used by humans. So the perspective is digital processing and data are as old as human civilization. It's more or less what makes us special. Now, because it's the capability of logic that sets us apart in the world, and which has made us masters of that world, right, quote unquote, we tend to assume that it's logic that drives intelligence and thus success. So our idea of an intelligence test is logical puzzles. And our idea of intelligent machines has often been mastering logical worlds, such as chess or Go, things we are actually, as humans, find very difficult. 2,500 years of footnotes to Plato, that's our Western culture, and a lot of logic is also in other cultures, like, in India. And also the Turing test. We tend to assume that we are the logical and the smart party, and that if you can't fool us, then you must be intelligent. The problem with all that is that humans are actually very bad at logic. We are far better at frisbee than we are at logic. So there is a kind of a disconnect between how good we are at logic and how important we think it is. And there is another aspect of the digital world. That is, if you try to do real work with digital computers, you run into the problem of exponential computing demands, right? Things like protein folding calculations or other things, you get combinatorial explosions. And it's very hard to do things with digital computers if it's really real. So how much we can, improve the power of digital computing, that we will run into into a limit. And one is already showing, right? At this point, all the digital machines in the world produce as much CO2 as the aviation. So that's really a problem, and it's getting out of hand. And that's one of the reasons why so many people are interested in quantum computing, because quantum computing is not based on discrete numbers; it's based on real. So it's infinitely more powerful. However, there are reasons to doubt that it's going to to work. But I can't go into that at this point. However, the perspective is, if you want to do real things, the things that are real in the world with dimensionless discrete logic, that's fundamentally as problematic as trying to create the real numbers from the integer numbers. Mathematically, it's possible, and you need an infinite number of them, in the sense that you need an infinite size or an infinite number of computers to do the real things. And we don't have that. And we haven't really run into the limit yet, but we're going to. And there is another aspect. We have a lot of logic, machine logic now in the world. Now let's look at what this machine logic actually, how this behaves. And here's a perspective. Of course, if the world was just a ball of stone, it's not very interesting. So what's interesting about the world is change. Any mindful and mindless behavior in the world. And as we saw, there are two types of behavior. You have the discrete behavior and you have the non-discrete behavior, the real behavior. And the essence of the information revolution was that we have actually added unprecedented and unimaginable amounts of logic into the world. And that's really new. There was already physical behavior, and we added to that under human intent. But what we actually have brought into the world is an imaginable amount of logical behavior. Now, the information revolution also gives the industrial revolution a boost, because by having these logical machines which perform our intent, we can actually steer the physical revolution even more. So we can have more productive factories, robots, etc., etc. So it's kind of an amplification on an amplification. But as we all experience, IT landscapes, IT heavy landscapes are becoming harder and harder to change. And that's because of a combination of the fact that that logic fundamentally is rigid, dumb, and brittle. And that landscape is kind of becoming a loosely coupled spaghetti of massive amounts of machine logic. Now, the fact that it's becoming harder and harder to change, that so many projects fail, that they get late, that they kind of, you know, twice as long and 3 times as expensive, that has to do with the fact that it becomes harder and harder to change things with all that loosely coupled spaghetti of logic. So the perspective is that all that machine logic shows something that looks like mass, like an inertia, like a resistance to change. And that large IT changes are hard or even failed is something that we haven't culturally accepted yet. So the true complexity, and most of it is because the true complexity of IT is invisible for most of us. The people in IT know it, they know it, but they're often asked, and especially architects are asked, so give me the simple picture. And what happens is that if we, you know, translate it into a simple picture, then the people we're telling it to, they think it's actually simple, which it isn't. This inertia, this mass is also doing something to our organizations. And in the 60s, Mr. Conway said, if I look at organizations and I look at their IT, then I see actually if the organization has a sales and a marketing department, so separate, I find a sales application and a marketing application. Whereas if there is a sales and marketing department, I find a sales and marketing application. And Frederick Brooks has called that's Conway's law. The IT of an organization kind of mirrors the structure of the organization. But these days, it's kind of turning around. The mass of IT is so large, and it's become so much harder to change, that the flexible humans are starting to organize themselves around the mass of IT. And you can see that, for instance, in what we call digital transformation. So on the left, you have your classical company, which has a purpose, right? A why, a strategy, and goals. And from it follows a human organization with departments and business units and so forth. And we want the IT to support those processes. And that's the classic business IT alignment. But these days, the IT becomes so overwhelmingly important for everything we do that actually we have product owners and value streams and all those kind of things like in SAFe and DevOps and Agile, where we organize ourselves around IT instead of the other way around. So more or less the inverse Conway's law. Of course, we still have some human processes that do actually the work, and we have our machine logic that supports those processes. So our organizations are changing because of the mass of the huge mass of logic we are bringing into those organizations and into the world. But apart from our organizations, it's also doing something to us. And that's what I call the mental cyborg. Excuse me. So have a look at these two pictures. So on the left, we see a termite mound, and on the right, we see a freeway and a cityscape. And if you ask people, the left is nature and the right is non-nature, right? That's cities, that's not natural. We see some power lines in the background, so we see some non-nature there too. I'm working from a different perspective, and that perspective is that human cities and freeways are as much natural as termite mounds are natural, right? Human cities and freeways is what we do as a species. We create factories, freeways, cities, and all the things. It's nature, and it's what we do to nature. So what we do and what we are, separating these, is more or less an illusion. What we are, it's what we do, and what we do is what we are. So the behavior of our tools is part of our behavior, right? We act through our tools. And this was already true, of course, before computing. The machine logic we employ, algorithms, are then an extension of our species' behavior. And of course, also those tools influence us. That's, again, that's not new, right? Mass media, press, TV, radio already influenced us. Previous talk was talking about nudges, etc. Influencing is, part of the game of being human. But the machine logic we employ has extended us with a new interface, all kinds of devices, and also new ways through which our species can be affected. In short, that is the IT we have in the world, that's us, right? It's kind of a part of us. We are also our IT. So that smartphone you hold in your hand is an extension of you. It's an interface. You affect other humans and they affect you. And of course, what's new is you affect algorithms and the algorithms affect you. So what is new is you interact with many, many more humans than before. And what's also new is you interact with that huge growing volume of machine logic, right? The machine logic eats your data, the things you do, and again, then presents you with, say, ads or whatever, based on, again, those statistics. So here are a couple of examples. Going viral, yeah, right, a meme. You share something, if it goes viral, you created that, you actually interacted with millions of people. That was not really easy before. Algorithmic commercial advertising, right? That's manipulation of economic behavior. That's what the companies want. And that's improved because of the algorithms. The same, of course, for political advertising or influencing, right? That's the manipulation of political behavior, like voting. And there is something new too, because the profit-driven machine logic is mindlessly steering people into conspiracy theory rabbit holes. So all these things are happening because we have those new devices, those new interfaces, and those new tools which are part of human behavior. Now, Elon Musk wants to connect our humans even with computers, right? With his Neuralink company. I would say, never mind, Elon. It's already happening, right? We have already become human digital cyborgs. But the interface is not a physical one. The interface is a mental one, and which is, of course, quite logical because IT is logic and it's a logical tool. So it's a mental tool. And that brings us to a very important aspect for humans in society, and that's the aspect of trust. Now, if you wonder about trust and you say, what is trust? Then it's actually trust is the assumption of future behavior. You trust something without having proof. So it's an assumption. So I trust you to tell me the truth. I trust you to pay me back. I trust you not to hurt me. I trust you to have my back in times of need. Or distrust, I trust you to betray me or whatever. Now, what trust does in a group is it increases efficiency and thereby effectiveness of a group at any group level, as it prevents internal friction, right? Transaction costs, etc. Which means that if you can trust people, you don't have to spend energy and time to take into account that they might do things that are not positive, right? So you don't have, it's kind of efficient to trust people. But how can you trust people and how do you establish trust? Well, humans mainly do that through talk. This is how our cousins, the chimps, are doing it. And interestingly, in the first talk of today already, Mr. Levy already mentioned Dunbar's argument. Now, Dunbar said, if you look at the history of language, he said, well, actually what language does is the same role as what fleecing does amongst other primates. And that is, it's for building relations. But language has enabled us to build actually much larger stable groups. So the role fleecing has among primates, that's his argument, is kind of the same role as language plays in humans. It's deep in our nature, this. And this number, by the way, of 150 to 200 people for, say, standard groups has been corroborated. Human hunter-gatherer groups tend to be limited to roughly that size. Now, a key example of language is gossip. And that means we're exchanging unverified information about other members in the group. For instance, Sally and Anne tell you Teddy is not to be trusted. And this prevents you wasting energy on Teddy and Teddy's information. And this is actually a negative feedback mechanism within the group. But suppose Teddy turns out to be trustworthy after all. You will trust Sally and Anne less. This is, again, negative feedback on negative feedback. Now, as engineers and architects, we actually know that negative feedback is a very important mechanism to provide stability in systems. Now, human groups have become much larger than Dunbar's number. We have nations that are more than 1 billion people. So the question, of course, becomes, how did we ever successfully establish functioning larger groups? And the answer is that larger groups are based on large, mixed, overlapping, and vague shared convictions, like religion, like the concept of individual freedom, like the concept of the rule of law, like the belief that collective actions are more effective than individual actions, or the other way around. There are groups based on the fact that individual actions are supreme over everything. A shared history, I believe in the importance of logic. So those shared convictions in a group also decrease the uncertainty about assessing and predicting the behavior of other members of the group. I'm not afraid that my neighbor, if I make noise, that he starts shooting at my window, and he will probably push, he ring the bell and he's like, can you, tone it down a little bit. That's a shared conviction, even if I don't know it. And these shared convictions are also the foundation of many of our institutions. For instance, strong shared beliefs and a defining moral code lie at the heart of organized religion. The importance of logic, right, lies at the heart of science, but also at the heart of some very simplistic political theories, like, say, the rational actor in simple economic theories. The importance of fairness, which we all share, lies at the heart of the judiciary, and the importance of truth, facts, lies at the heart of true journalism, say not the tabloid kind, but the true journalism. And the advantage of collective action lies at the heart of all kinds of groups, unions, countries, supranational organizations. But there is something special with people's convictions, and that the people's convictions can actually change more easily than their natural tendencies, right? They are more fluid foundations. And it seems that the more rational and logical these convictions are, the less robust they seem to be. And that kind of echoes the fact that the logic is not of this world, right? It's the reality that is of this world. Now, over millennia, our convictions and our institutions have changed a lot, but we still talk and gossip as we did before. Talk and gossip are so fundamental to our nature that they are almost impossible to stop. Only a total brainwashing or complete fear culture will do it. Like, say, Eastern Germany tried, and like, for instance, the situation is in North Korea. Now, our natural tendency to accept talk and gossip until negative feedback kicks in can enable all kinds of brainwashing, like propaganda. And none of this is IT specific, right? And none of it is absolutely new. But the algorithms make the manipulation even more effective because of more individual targeting. And that brings me to social media. What social media does is it creates a structure for talk and gossip, core natural human behavior at the global level. And if that gets into conflict with our, say, conviction-based institutions, you don't have to wonder who's going to win, right? It's the natural tendencies. So from an architect designer's perspective, social media does not provide a good structure for proper negative feedback, which means it is inherently unstable. And making it worse, the profit-driven algorithms of social media, keep you on the platform so they can feed you advertisements and they can make money of it, which is, an understandable business model. But they are actually providing positive feedback. So that means that the fact that people end up in rabbit holes is a direct consequence of the positive feedback of the social media algorithms. And these damage are far more brittle conviction-based institutions, such as everything fact-based, like journalism or the judiciary or science, whatever. And for me, that means that the assumptions of the creators of social media, like Zuckerberg and like the people who were behind Twitter, they were as naive as the 18th century idea of rational actors in economic modes. Because both assume that we have rational humans with a decent intelligence. The interesting thing is that already in the 90s, I had these discussions with people when the internet was new, and they said, that's going to change everything. We're going to have full democracy, and everybody can have all the information, and we can make the best decisions. They assume rational humans with a decent intelligence, but we are not that smart. Even the most intelligent humans, even your professor in philosophy at your local university, he's still fundamentally a gossipy primate. And he will do a lot of talk and gossip next to the analytics that he does. Now, the biologist E.O. Wilson said, at some point, the real problem of humanity is the following. We have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and a godlike technology. And that kind of a sentiment that people can understand and think, yeah, that's right. I think it's wrong. The emotions are not Paleolithic. It's who we are in the here and now. Modern humans have those same emotions. And it's not the medieval institutions that are brittle. It's modern ones, like science and like independent journalism and democracy, the democracies that we have. And as the technology people know, it's not godlike technology, not at all. It's dumb and stupid technology. It's powerful, it's fast, and it's fast also, but it's not godlike. So my personal take on this is that we have technology that short circuits our limited intelligence, thereby destroying our shared convictions. And that is, it's individual profit driven, it's our gossip sensitive and limited intelligence, and it's our shared conviction based brittle group level institutions. So the social dilemma that we are facing now is about economic value on the one hand, and the moral values of society, the shared convictions we have to share to have a society on the other hand. And I find it particularly ironic that the, in part, accidental billionaires of big tech seem to be clinging to an 18th century idea and assumption and models in a way that has been outdated by their own tech. So Mark Zuckerberg says, we protect free speech. And he thinks that the ideas about free speech that were written 200 years ago in a situation then with not this kind of algorithms and not this kind of, say, a million people talking to a million people are still 100% and actually valid, that's ironic, right? And for me, that means we need a different perspective. We need a paradigm shift. We actually need to understand that we are not so smart. We are too dumb. We are not intelligent. We are more intelligent than the rest. We have a very small bit of analytical logic, but we're not really, really very smart. We're gossipy primates. So if there is hope for humanity, and if it's climate change, or if it's democracy, or is it a fair society, it has also to come from being smart enough to become aware of the fact that we are not smart. And that we have to act based on that awareness, that we not build our systems based on we are smart humans, that we build our systems and our institutions based on being aware of the fact that we are not smart humans, but that we're weak humans. And I'm very much afraid that such a paradigm shift has to overturn 2,500 years footnotes to Plato and 2,500 years of a human superiority culture. So it's a very tall order, and I think it's questionable that we actually can do it fast enough to prevent disasters. And that brings us to the title of my talk, which was Masters or Servants. Are we still in control? Now, the recap is human behavior is being embedded in a massive amount of machine logic. Some of that machine logic is AI-like, right? IT is massive, often hidden, unknown logical algorithms. It's logic. That's all it is. But IT is dumb. It suffers from fundamental weaknesses of logic. Brittle, inflexible, not like actual human intelligence at all. But algorithms and massive statistics can be very powerful in affecting us as mental cyborgs with a limited intelligence. And by the way, there are a lot of good things in AI too, right? Finding new medicine, doing all kind of smart things, right? But what it does to society is actually very negative. So all that IT in the world, including AI, is executing human intent. It's our intent. We are still the master. Directing change is becoming harder and harder because of inertia, and understanding what it exactly does becomes harder too. So there are some limitations inside. On the other hand, all that volume of logical behavior from IT is steering us. We are the servants. And what's actually happening is that those that decide on the algorithms are still mostly masters. And those that undergo the effects of the algorithms become more and more servants. And if you, like me, don't like that outcome, then we have to do something. So what about things that we can do? And in the short run, what can we do? Well, as far as I'm concerned, we need extra limitations on talk. We have to protect truthfulness, and we have to prevent lies. And again, this is not new. It's fraught with risk, right? And the law can be used to stifle free speech, and it can protect corruption, etc. But if you look, for instance, the American Constitution, the First Amendment of free speech, the Supreme Court of the United States has said the First Amendment does not protect lies. There are some exceptions to that, and we have maybe to address those. But in essence, they have said the First Amendment does not protect lies. You cannot, con people and then say it's my First Amendment right to actually lie to people. So we need extra limitations on talk. And we need extra protections for our shared convictions and institutions. And again, this is fraught with risk. One of the exceptions for, say, the not protecting lies is that lies about the government in the American Constitution, they are allowed because the government is deemed to be so powerful that if the government could go after you in kind of in a lawsuit, that would be very uneven in terms of power. So the people who are behind the Constitution and explaining the Constitution have said, okay, we don't want the government to have that protection. The interesting thing, of course, is that IT now, the massive IT is changing that. Is government still the most powerful force there is? Or is the government, which is not allowed to lie and has to be fair, etc., confronted with a lot of gossip, which is kind of amplified, and people end up believing all the most crazy things and making kind of society impossible. And that brings us to that we also need extra protections for people. You don't need a security of body alone, right? That you no bodily harm, etc. But you also need some kind of a security of mind, mental harm. And the problem here is that, of course, security of mind is very hard to pin down, but we have to address these issues if we want to save a fair and good society. So to start with, my idea was that we could start working with an ethic oath for those working in IT, like a Hippocratic oath, right? What are we IT people going to work about, how are we going to work? What are we going to do and do not? So I came up with the following oath, which said that because we need shared convictions, and because the most beneficial convictions are the factually truthful ones, and because we are strongly influenced by the information we get, I declare as an IT person, an architect and engineer, I will not work on systems that have the effect of damaging society by weakening the flow of factual truthful information or by amplifying the flow of factually untruthful or misleading information. And I will not work on systems that damage people's security of mind. And I will not remain silent if I know of such systems being created or used. Now, there are a couple of elements I want to point out to you. First, the importance of factually truth. It's about factually truthful, just protecting truth and preventing lies. And the second one is that I don't say that you're not allowed to work on systems where lies are being spread, or people put in lies that they're not allowed to lie or whatever. You know, I want free speech as everybody. However, if the effect of the systems you work on are so great that they damage society, and they do that not so much by the information itself, but by weakening the flow of factually truthful or amplifying the flow of untruthful or misleading information, then you must wonder by yourself, is this what I want to work on, right? It's a bit like that a lot of physicists have over the past given an oath: I will not work on nuclear weapons. I will not work on things that are bad for society. So the second one is, of course, that I will not work on systems where I think, okay, this is damaging people's security of mind. I am now working on a system that kind of manipulates people to such an extent that they are not actually thinking on their own anymore. And the same, of course, you can do for investors, right? Without the last one, it's roughly the same thing. Not invest in companies that weaken the flow of factual, truthful information or amplify the flow of untruthful, misleading information. There are also things that we should do in society, I think, right? Let's take our shared conviction about fair and free and equal, etc. And let's fight back. And that means that you need to regulate things. So the problem with regulation is how to protect against negative effects of regulation, like protecting free speech while you actually say some things are criminal or illegal, protecting, say, free trade, while at the same time say you're not allowed to sell nuclear weapons, whatever. So I came up with a couple of things that we could do as a society. The first one is that we could criminalize the use of money to spread untruth. So if you use money to, say, increase the flow of untruth, that's not allowed. It's not new. There are many countries that have laws against false advertising, for instance. That's the same thing. But I want to couple it to the use of money. And why? Because people have to be free to spread any untruth. Maybe they believe the untruth, no problem with that. But if you use money to actually do that, then you become liable. Criminalize the for-profit amplification of untruth and the for-profit weakening of truth. So if the Facebooks and the Googles of this world do not get their act together and make sure that they not have a positive feedback that actually destroys society in the long run, they're criminals. You have to strictly limit the amount of personalization platforms are allowed to use. And you have to criminalize algorithms pretending to be human, right? All these fake bots on these platforms that say, you know, I'm a human, I'm retweeting this, or I'm liking this, etc., etc. Now, a final observation before I'm at the end of my talk is that I find it also very ironic that a technology, IT, which is based on working with the values true and false logic, has consequences that undermine proper working of the concepts of true and false in the real world. And with that, I end my talk. In the PDF, which will be available later, there are some links to, for instance, the Center for Humane Technology, and some articles and some other things. And that means we can kind of talk and gossip together.
Gerben, that was an amazing presentation, and I think that you've done an amazing first step towards addressing, you know, some of the really big issues around information, truthfulness, sharing, and all sorts of things. We do have some comments and questions, though. So the first comment is a short comment to Gerben. I've got the problem definition, and it makes total sense. The problem is for me when someone says something like security of mind. I always think of the Ministry of Truth, you know, from the 1984. It's not about not to think about it, but there are definitely risks. And it's funny, in that question, I'm almost thinking of, things from 1984 like doublethink and control of the truth. How do you think we could safeguard that so that we don't get that happening?
Okay, what I was thinking about in the most extreme way was we have, say, 3 pillars of society, right? We have the judiciary, we have the lawmakers, and we have the executive. Now, if you want to give the executive some power to protect itself against the onslaught of untruth and gossip and whatever, then you might need a fourth. Then you need maybe a pillar in society that is actually has the task to protect people. That actually can say, I am the one who actually says, for instance, it could also hand out money for a pluriform press, or it could do all kind of things kind of separate from the executive, but with a single task, protect people. That would be one of the things. I've mentioned that in one of my one of the stories that are behind this talk. And by the way, may I ask you that there is one more Menti question that is now available for people who were on the talk. You can actually answer the questions.
Urban, I'd like to ask you another question, and this is one that sort of I find very troubling, actually, and I don't know what we can do about it until we get an ethics code. But we find that these bots or these AIs are actually optimizing sort of our attention. They're trying to essentially harvest our attention, right? And to the point where we can get situations where one person will actually do a different search, say on Google, that's customized to sort of lure them to spend more time somewhere than another person. And we almost get these like different realities that people are acting in. Do you think there's anything we can do today, like right off this call, to help prevent that? Or do you even think it's a problem?
It's absolutely, it's a huge problem. And that's why in my proposals for what do you want to criminalize, I want to criminalize that behavior, right? It's destructive for society. You can see it everywhere. Like society is fragmenting into people, into bubbles where the shared convictions are gone. And without shared convictions, you don't have anything larger than a tribal group of 150 to 200 people. And even if people are now in groups of millions, they act like that tribal group of 150 to 200 people. So it's essential that we do something about it. The commercial model of the Facebooks and the Googles of this world are actually destroying society.
Gerben, can you give us an example where you have fallen prey to disinformation or false information and how you worked out of it? Like, what did you do?
Well, actually, a couple of, I think 4 years ago in 2016, I got a meme about Donald Trump, who supposed to had said, if I ever going to run for president, I will run as a Republican because those people are stupid and I can fool them more easily. And I sent that on to somebody else. And then afterwards, I found out it's a hoax. He never said that, right? He did not say that. It was not true. And that in that point in time, it made me wonder. I was convinced it was true. How is that possible? And that is because it fits my belief system, right? I could totally understand that the guy would do that because, in my view, he is he's a moral whole. That's my personal view, right? Other people can have a different view. But the point is, I was wrong. He did not say that. And at that point, I thought, well, okay, I've fallen for it. How easy have I fallen for it? And, you can be really think that you're smart and that you don't fall for hoaxes or whatever, or for phishing or for whatever. But we are not that smart. We are not smart. And that moment in time, say, yeah, you're not smart either. You fell for it. It was false. So I've become very, I say that I look up things a lot, right? And I left Facebook a couple of years ago, except for one page that automatically gets filled from whenever I publish a new story, and that's it.
So, Gerben, if we monitor truth, another question I have is, you know, if we went back at some point, there was a time when we thought that the Earth was the center of the universe and the sun revolved around the Earth, and if that was our truth, how would we ever change things if we sort of have an accepted truth that we don't challenge? And how can we
Ah,
safely challenge things?
yeah, that's a very good question. How did that truth get challenged? The truth got challenged through truth, right? It got challenged through science. It did not get challenged through anything else. So science still goes on, right? We can have science. We can now believe something scientific that we can change. Nothing wrong with that. And even in science, it's true that we have paradigms which are very slow to change. People work from a certain paradigm, but it changes. So independent, real journalism, not the tabloid kind, because that's kind of an extension of the gossip story, right? It's older than these algorithms, right? The algorithms only make it worse. But real journalism, an independent judiciary, science, all these institutions that are the carriers of the important values. That's the way progress happens. Science is one of the important ones. But not only science, right? If we talk about ethics and good or evil, we still can talk to each other and convince each other. As long as, what I don't say you can't have a different meaning, right? There is a truth in anything ethical or moral, like say euthanasia. There's no truth there. There's no truth. We have to convince each other, and we strike a compromise or whatever. But if it's factually untruth, right? And then you have to wonder, how do I decide on factual truth? And we have systems for that: science, judiciary, say independent journalism. Those are all. It's not strange that the institutions that are mostly under attack these days by autocrats and others are science, independent journalism, and the judiciary, because they're all about truth. And factual truth is under attack. So we need to protect it.
We have a comment from the audience. Science is not science if it cannot be falsified. Otherwise,
Yes,
it's just belief. And I'm just wondering, as you're talking, you talk about factual truth versus just sort of the general falsification of a belief. It seems very subtle to me.
yes, it is. Science is something must be a scientific statement must be falsifiable. I totally agree with that, right? And the interesting thing is, how do you falsify it? In science, you do the experiment, and then it turns out that the theory you had was false. Now, the facts of the experiment, those are factual truths, right? So science, true, even if it falsifies something, it doesn't do that because, I don't like it. They do it based on experiment. They do it based on analysis. They do it based on whatever, right? So there is nothing in that needs to be shut down, right? As long as, if suppose there is, but again, as I said, these questions are important, right? And they are correct because it's fraught with risk. But if we don't do it, truthfulness and factualness is going to lose out on gossip. And it's going to be powered by, say, these individual profit motives. Now, we need to do something without destroying science, without destroying free speech, without destroying all kinds of fairness, etc., etc. But if we don't do it, it gets destroyed much faster.
We have some more questions. So the next question, are we too connected? Have we simply broken our Dunbar limit in this hyper-connected world, inviting mounting failures? Is part of our future solution to limit human connection networks, to limit our cognitive loads?
I don't know. Even before all this massive machine logic, we had large organizations like countries, etc. So you still have your that can work, as long. The problem is not so much in that we are comfortable with working with 150 to 200 people. The problem is that those mechanisms are now, without the proper negative feedback and even with positive feedback, have been sized up to millions. Do you want to limit these networks, or do you want to make sure that these networks have the proper negative feedbacks? I would say make sure they have the proper negative feedbacks, and don't go back in time, but go forward and actually regulate the fact that they get their proper negative feedbacks, and society gets more stable in terms of managing its shared convictions.
We have another question. How do we know when an algorithm intended to provide the best answers to someone's question, whether someone has crossed the line into the purveyance of disinformation?
I would say that's interesting. Again, all these things are new, right, and difficult. I would say that if you set up an experiment and you follow, say, the suggestions of an algorithm, and you quickly end up in things that are factually untruthful, then it would be proven that the algorithm has a hand in this, right?
Is there any other? Yeah, sorry, I interrupted you, Gerber.
No, there was this TV guy in the Netherlands. He's also known outside the Netherlands, Arjen Lubach, and he took a clean system with a clean browser, and he got a clean profile, and he started on, say, Google, and he said, "Oh, I wanted to know about vaccines," and within 3 clicks, he was in Gagaland, right, with strange conspiracy theories. So if that happens, yeah, that's destructive. And I would say that if the rules are that you're not allowed to actually promote or amplify falsehoods, then if you go for a judge and you say, well, judge, I tried it 20 different times, and every time, so if it talks like a duck and it walks like a duck, it's probably is a duck.
Very interesting. So I have, this is an amazing discussion. I think it's the start on an ethic of privacy, data collection. Is there any other questions for Gerben before we call it a day? I think this was an amazing discussion, Gerben. That's really, it's certainly, I think a first attempt at addressing some of the questions that we have to deal with around, data privacy, censorship, and where we're going with social platforms. A really great discussion today.
Okay, thank you very much.